Hey all, it's your girl Erin, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about accountability and calling people out, and I guess you could also say cancel culture. So to begin with, I wanted to talk about the cancel culture vibe idea, and is it true that such a thing exists, that there is people who are out there trying to cancel others and people out there getting cancelled or being afraid of getting cancelled? Obviously that is a thing that happens, but it's not something that radical activists, for example, engage in, because it has no value to building ethical movement. It's a movement for social justice, because radical people believe in restorative justice and not punitive justice. So yes, there are people out there who that's just what they want to do. They just want to try and get certain people to be hated, or get them to, get so much negativity that they stop wanting to participate in discourse. Those people suck. But the thing is, like, those aren't gonna be your radical people, right? And now the difficult thing is that you can't always tell if somebody is radical or not, because like they could, for example, know a whole bunch of political theory, and they might know how to sound radical. They might be able to quote Marx or Kropotkin or Bakunin or Malatesta, or like they might have really good like academic style knowledge of radical politics without actually thinking in a radical manner. And so I like to call those types of people radlibs or radical liberals, because the radical part of it there is all in their heads. The liberal part is what they really are. They are acting in exactly the same patterns of behavior as the liberals, which, like the centrists do, or even like center left, like they're acting very much similar to that, while having the aesthetic and quoting it and speaking in language that sounds radical, that's revolutionary. So maybe I can give you an example quickly of that. So people who are all like saying stuff like, obviously sometimes elections are absolutely like meaningless to participate in, but sometimes if you vote, there is going to be a difference in candidate depending who wins, and different candidates are going to have different policies. Yet the radical liberals will start saying stuff like, you shouldn't vote because you can never vote away capitalism, you can never vote away the problems, and so you should abstain. Or they'll say like, voting is what validates the state, and all this kind of stuff, as if nobody voted, the state would just like resign. That's not what would happen. So you can see from like the real radical way of thinking is that we need to get ourselves out of the mess we're in, and that means winning on every possible front we can win on, including elections. But you still would think that you need a revolution to get away from capitalism. You just wouldn't see voting and revolution as exclusionary, as mutually exclusive. They would be two things that almost help each other, because the more reforms for social justice you can push through, the further your society's average will move, because it gets normalized, and so people start to feel like those ideas are normal, and then they're more likely to consider things even further left than that. So reforms help you to get to revolution. But so I would say, if people sound revolutionary, if they are using fancy talk, even if they're talking about anarchism, anarcho-communalism, anarcho-syndicalism, the stateless society, they can be saying all the right things, but they might be acting liberal, and they might want to either act like cancel culture is a big problem, so that they can avoid criticism by just saying the people calling them out are doing a cancel, or they will want to cancel other people. Now, we actually do need to have calling out as part of our discourse, because the thing is, nobody is perfect, right? And so it's like the people that don't want any negativity, don't want any call-outs, never challenge anybody, they're essentially like giving up on people. They're saying like, look, we just don't believe you're capable of improving, and so we're not going to give you the opportunity. We're going to protect you from criticism, because they might think that it's impossible for people to get better, it's impossible for people to improve, so why bother? They might feel like it's more important to have a shallow aesthetic, appearance only look of solidarity and unity. It can look like you've got everybody friendly, happy times, and again, this is extremely non-revolutionary. It's very radical liberal thinking, because if such a movement actually did catch on, if all these people with these huge disagreements actually just put their disagreements aside and acted friendly and didn't challenge each other, didn't call each other out, didn't point out any huge flaws in the ideas that other people have, or their behavior, well, then when you actually maybe even came to power, it would turn into a mess because nobody would agree on any of the substantive policy type stuff. And so it's a false unity. It's completely a charade, and it actually prevents you from achieving real unity, because it silences the legitimate criticisms, and it makes it so that the environment is in such a way that criticism is viewed as something negative, as it's something inherently bad that should be avoided, and people who do it are troublemakers. And this is actually very much so an authoritarian way of thinking, and it serves those who do have a ton of social capital, because now they've already got into the top, problems and all. Nobody's going to challenge them, and because they're at the top, because they have so much attention, the things they say get listened to, the things they say feel like they have more of an impact, because they do impact conversations, they do get a lot of people to agree who might not know better, and it actually can start to, those ideas can start to take on even though they're incorrect. And so, if you have problematic ideas, even if you're being harmful, you get a free pass because nobody's allowed to challenge you, because if they do, then ooh, they're sectarian, they're causing dissent, troublemakers. And so there seems to be like now a lot of these people are revealing themselves as being like radical in rhetoric only, not in actual thinking, because they are now acting that way. They are going against criticism, and criticism is really important. Like, that's what should be normalized. Being called, like, it's like if you actually are honest about reality and about yourself, then you're gonna be making mistakes constantly. And so being told that you made a mistake should be part of your normal day of life. Like, oh, it's Monday today, I got called out for something wrong and I need to work on it, and then you get better. That's how we all collectively improve our ethics, so that we are all getting along much better in a substantive way, not just because we're keeping silent about harms that are going on, but because we've actually started learning not to do the harms in the first place. So that's how we achieve understanding, an ethical understanding, individually and collectively. We grow together and on our own as part of the collective to get to a point where we understand what is harmful to others and what isn't well enough that we don't need daddy daycare state or like HR or whatever to solve the problems for us, because we are aware and we can come together as a group and solve the problems and address harm. And so criticism is a sign of a healthy movement, a healthy community. Because if nobody's ever getting called out, then even if you want to tell yourself that they are all small issues, I don't think that's valid. But even if you want to tell yourself that, you've now normalized not saying anything, and so when something genuinely bad happens, then there's so much pressure on the people not to rock the boat, not to reveal it. But now let's just talk for a little bit about this notion that some of these things are just small. Okay, so I'm going to talk about somebody like Vosh, for example. I've seen them on video repeatedly. I've seen it many times. They go off on a rant, calling people subhuman, degenerate, mentally ill. They fetishize power. They say like, oh, we need people to be strong, like can't just be weak and all that shit that's super ableist. I mean, he says, he said something like, a lot of the people trying to cancel ContraPoints are like mentally ill, like queer people, and like said it as if it was like some bad thing. And like obviously the gaslighting will ensure if you actually challenge him and, oh no, I didn't mean it as a slur, or like when he defends using the N-word and then says like it's fine saying those jokes to his girlfriend with a hard R when he says it because nobody else is around. Like, that's not okay. And yet you'll still have people going around calling him a comrade. And that now we should, in a healthy community or in a healthy movement, that should be an easy thing to solve. We should say, no, that's not acceptable. No, you're not a comrade. And until we see evidence that you've actually changed, not just denials, not just apologies and then you do it again, but you've actually started to act differently, like you understand what you did wrong and you're not doing that anymore. When that happens, then maybe we can talk about whether you're a comrade or not. But we don't just give people free passes, or because we like them or whatever, that we're gonna puff them up and say that they're actually good people. Like, y'all acting like Blue Lives Matter people. And then the other person that I wanted to mention was ContraPoints, because some people act like it's just such a small thing. I am someone who says that the concept of passing is transphobic, that calling gender binary is transphobic, because gender can't be binary. And people say, oh, it's just a word, it's just referring to the two genders in the cis heteronormative model, or it's just because there's like traditionally been the two. And it's like, that's the effing problem. We need to stop thinking that way. We need to stop thinking of there being two defaults. We need to break away from that way of thinking. And so you can't just say, oh well, you know, I'm just referring to this thing that, you know, framing, you know, that is transphobic, is framing that is implying that if you're not one of those two things, that you're somehow out of the norm. That's nonsense. It's out of the norm, to be honest, to be one of those two things. Gender just cannot be called binary. Even thinking that gender can be binary is transphobic, because you can't think it if you're thinking of gender in a trans-positive way. Like, if you think of a spectrum, now gender has multiple dimensions to it. It's basically a higher dimensional concept. So even if you look at a 3D model, like, you know, like a sphere or donut or something in 3D with a spectrum, you're still only using 3 axes for that. Gender is multi-dimensional. You can't picture it in your brain, okay? Yet people want to say one of the genders on that is binary and another isn't. It's ridiculous. And even if you could single out a point, like you could say, oh well, even a sphere has 2 points, they're polar opposite. Well, yeah, but they are not binary prominent. Like, it's not like a long tube with 2 ends on a sphere. It's, you wouldn't know when you walked over the binary if you were walking over it or not. So if you can identify a binary on a, like, if you can identify a binary, then it's not a sphere-like binary, because you can't identify a sphere-like binary. So every argument that says that it's okay to use the words binary is actually full of crap. And now, I made a response video to ContraPoints, and it was like 4.5 hours long, because I did a response to 3 of her videos, and her videos were like an hour long each or whatever. So my response was quite a bit longer. But the hardest thing about making that video was trying not to agree with ContraPoints, because I knew, like, in theory, I knew that I had a good understanding of gender that validated my experiences and was inclusive to everybody. Yet, because of her social capital and because of how much people act like she's this hero and says all these positive things, I felt that temptation to think, what if I'm wrong? What if she's actually right? And the hardest thing about it was, like, if I had actually managed to agree with her, I knew I'd die, because that's how invalidating the things she was saying were, that I wouldn't be able to live with myself, because I would never be able to attain something that I would then have agreed needed to be attained for me to identify the way I want to. Which, and you know, you don't have to believe me about how serious that is, but I came to this position that gender can't be binary out of survival. It's not just a nice idea. And so expecting people like me to not to be like okay with the continual pushing of those ideas by someone like ContraPoints, I must just not call it out. I must just stay silent and, you know, just be a good, friendly person or whatever, even though I was super constructive in my criticism and went through it in detail explaining why it was harming me, and that was really traumatic. And even though, you know, I did all the things you're supposed to do to be constructive, I must still not call it out. I must still keep silent, because then, you know, otherwise I'm being negative and troublemaker and all this. And yet I can't just change my opinion. I can't just say, oh well, it's fine if you identify as binary, it's actually okay. No, it harms me, and I know it harms me because it's something that I have to resist just to feel like, you know, I'm like I can actually have a gender, like that it's not something that I shouldn't identify as. So yeah, anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to say, is that we need to have accountability so that we can avoid the harm, so that we can actually have a strong enough social movement that it could carry the weight of having power. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.